when I began exploring this, one of the first things I looked at was the history of money itself. Because I said, okay, what is a debt? A debt is essentially a promise which you can phrase in exactly quantifiable terms. Because you can quantify it, it's impersonal. And because it's impersonal, it's transferable. So, if I promise you that I will meet you at 5 o'clock, you can't actually transfer that to someone else, normally speaking. I guess in some circumstances you could. But a promise which is quantifiable, I promise you give you exactly this amount of things, you actually can turn over to someone else. And in a way that, according to many theories, that's what money actually is a transferable promise to render a certain amount of goods. One of the great questions is how that comes about, why the need to quantify promises happens, or to quantify them precisely. And we've had a story about why this happens that you read in your Basic Economic 101 textbook. It was actually invented by Adam Smith in 1776. The Wealth of Nations is the first time you see someone really making the argument in detail. And it continues to be the story that everybody knows and learns. They pick up somewhere or another. It becomes common sense. And here, as an anthropologist, I must say that I have a kind of a pet peeve in this respect, because it's a professional pet peeve on the part of anthropologists. Because this story was told, over 200 years ago. Almost immediately, we started going out in the world trying to find examples of people who do it, and we couldn't. It's not true. But they never changed the textbooks. We just can't get them to come up with a different story. But, all right, here's the story. You've all heard it before. Once upon a time, people lived in villages, and they used to swap things. There was barter. Say I wanted somebody's cow. Well, I said, all right, hey, I need a cow. Tell you what, I'll give you 30 chickens for that cow. And the guy's like, well, I don't know, 30's not much. 40 chickens, 45. All right, sold. So you come to some sort of arrangement, swap, go home. But the problem is maybe the guy doesn't want chickens. Maybe you don't happen to have anything he wants right now. What happens? Well, you can't make a deal, right? So the only way out of this problem crops up more and more over time, is to settle on something that everybody usually wants, like gold for some reason. Shiny metal, but it's kind of handy and pretty. There's a virtuous circle. The moment you start using it as a general equivalent, everybody needs it all the time. It turns into money. So barter is inconvenient. You get money. Government gets involved and starts stamping the stuff through uniform weights and quality. Although it starts cheating all the time and debasing the currency, because governments are bad in this version. Gradually you invent credit systems, and it's an evolutionary series. Barter, money, credit, securitized derivatives and whatnot are just sort of the last link in the chain. It follows logically. All right, so that's the story. As I say, there's one big problem. We've been scouring the world for over 200 years now, and we have never found a single community where everyday transactions take the form of, I'll give you 40 chickens for that cow. It's just they don't exist. Adam Smith himself had no way to know this. He was just speculating. But now we do, and they keep on telling the story. If you look at contemporary economic textbooks, the old ones used to say, well, primitive people do this, And now that they kind of know it's not true, they don't want to stop. So instead they say, well, imagine you didn't have money. What would you have to do? How would you get breakfast? Well, you'd have to barter, wouldn't you? And they tell the story as a kind of parable, which is basically what it is. There's an obvious reason, if you think about it, there's an obvious problem with the story, why it wouldn't happen, which is, you're taking a Neolithic village. You're a bunch of people who are neighbors. And you are assuming that they will only deal with each other with what economists like to call the spot trade. Here, I'm going to give you this, you're going to give me that, we walk away. But of course, why would they do that, right? They're neighbors. If the guy doesn't want my chickens, he knows I'm going to have something he wants because I'm his neighbor. In fact, it's rather nice to have your neighbor in your debt. It's useful for all sorts of things.